I'm Emily Chang, and this is the best of Bloomberg Technology, where we bring you all our top interviews from this week in tech. Coming up, Snap soars in trading after smashing estimates in the fourth quarter. We break down the company's first earnings victory since it went public. Plus, Tesla cools its cash burn, and after reporting fourth quarter earnings, the electric car maker still sees its Model 3 production meeting weekly goals. We'll break down the earnings numbers. And our exclusive conversation with Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg and why she says the Me Too movement hasn't gone far enough. But first, to our lead. Snap spiked after a blow-away fourth quarter earnings report Tuesday with revenue that topped analyst estimates for the first time since the company went public almost a year ago. The earnings were buoyed by momentum in its ad business and user growth. Snap said fourth quarter sales jumped 72% to $285 million, and its daily active users jumped to 187 million, up 18% from a year ago. We broke it down with eMarketer analyst Deborah Aho Williamson from Seattle, and in San Francisco, Bloomberg Tech's Sarah Fryer, who covers Snap.
What did Snap get right this quarter?
Well, they have been transitioning their advertising business to make it more automatic, more programmatic, selling ads basically automatically, which means they can have a bigger base of advertisers. The price of ads has actually gone down, but the volume and the amount of times people look at these ads is going up. So Snap has been able to really make this work for them in this quarter for the first time.
Deborah, what's jumping out to you? We know they've been doing a lot. There's a whole redesign, and perhaps we're seeing some of the results of that. But what do you think is really driving these results?
I think it is a couple of factors. I think that, first of all, Snapchat really needed this quarter, and because of the previous quarters not so good for them. So this was a super positive sign for the company. I really feel that users are still heavily engaged with Snapchat. That's proven out by the increase in user growth rate this quarter. And I think that advertisers, while some of them have been skeptical, they still see Snapchat as being a place where they can be super experimental, where they can try new things, and where they can really start to engage with that super important youth and teen audience.
I'm looking at the after hours chart here on my Bloomberg, still up 20%. The big question, Sarah, is can they sustain this over several quarters, not just one?
I think that's still a huge question because this company hasn't proven that it really has a lot of visibility into the future of its business. All the prior quarters included big surprises, nothing to show us that future quarters won't as well. They still have a long road ahead of them, and they're competing in this market that is dominated by Facebook and Google. Yes, those big players have advertisers wanting some alternative for their money. Snap is marketing itself as that alternative, much cheaper ads. But still, it's very competitive, and Instagram is just growing far past what Snap has in terms of spread for Snap's products that Snap has actually invented and been copied by Facebook.
Instagram and Facebook both accused of, basically lifting some of Snap's product ideas and executing them perhaps sometimes even better. Deborah, what do you think the real challenges are for Snap going forward in terms of what you're going to be watching?
Yeah. Well, first of all, to put a few numbers on what Sarah just said, we're forecasting that Instagram will have $8 billion in worldwide ad revenue this year, compared to about $1.5 billion for Snapchat. So you can see there's quite a lot of gap in between the two companies in terms of advertising revenue worldwide. However, Snapchat is growing at roughly the same rate, about 90% growth this year compared to about a similar amount for Instagram. So just to put those numbers on it. But to get back to your question, I think that the competition with Instagram and Facebook obviously is still something we're watching very, very closely. We're also watching because Snapchat up until now has been very aggressive with new products and new innovations. And we're starting to see things like Maps maybe not perform as well as maybe the company had hoped. We saw Spectacles perhaps also not perform as well as the company had hoped. So the question is, can Snapchat actually continue to be aggressively innovative and successful at those innovations and stay a step ahead of its competition?
And what about the leadership turnover at the company? Is that a concern to you?
To me, not so much. Obviously, you always want to have strong leaders at the company. We focus on looking at two factors at eMarketer. We look at growth in ad revenue or changes in ad revenue. We look at user changes. Both of those were positive this quarter, so I don't think that the changes in the management of the company are something that is impacting either of those factors at this point.
And Sarah, Evan Spiegel has made it clear that he knows that people who work at the company want to hear from him more. Do you think we'll start seeing more of him out there?
I think that there's a lot of confusion at the company right now because this redesign that you mentioned earlier, it was supposed to be done by the end of the year, and now we're seeing that it won't be fully rolled out until the end of the first quarter. So there are clearly some things that are still missing deadlines. There's been that management departure that you mentioned. I think that the company still has a lot to work out in terms of how it grows. There have also been a few rounds of layoffs recently at the company.
Apple is pulling back on buying corporate bonds with its overseas cash as it prepares to bring the money home to the United States. This according to people familiar with the matter. About $157 billion of Apple's $285 billion in cash is invested in corporate debt, making it a leading lender. Investors in investment-grade corporate bonds have been bracing for a market with fewer buyers since the new U.S. tax law was enacted late last year. Coming up, has the Me Too movement gone too far? Our exclusive conversation with Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg and her new call to action. Plus, PayPal co-founder Max Levchin sits down with us to discuss how his opinions about diversity and meritocracy in Silicon Valley have evolved. It's a fascinating conversation. This is Bloomberg. The Winklevoss brothers are not giving up on cryptocurrency, that despite Bitcoin plunging below the $6,000 mark to the lowest since mid-November.
We're long on the space. We don't sit there and watch the price day to day. We're in this for the long haul, whether that's a decade or many decades. So, like I said earlier, we remember when Bitcoin was $8. So as far as we're concerned, it's all gravy from here.
The twins are early Bitcoin investors, and at one point their net worth totaled more than $1 billion each when digital currency was at an all-time high last winter. They also just told Bloomberg Television that increased regulation is good for digital currency. Well, as one of the co-founders of PayPal, Max Levchin rose to be one of the most powerful men in technology, taking a center seat in Silicon Valley. In that position, his opinion around diversity and hiring has evolved greatly. I covered Levchin's story in my book, Brotopia, Breaking Up the Boys Club of Silicon Valley, now out in stores. We caught up with Levchin and talked about how things operated at PayPal.
I would describe my efforts at the time, with the benefit of hindsight, as just generally unaware. I was not particularly concerned with the gender balance or really any kind of balance. I was trying to hire good people as quickly as I could, and the one great source of excellent coders I knew was my alma mater, from where I came less than 2 years prior. And so I was actively vacuuming up the best and brightest that I spent time with in school, which all happened to be men. There were men of lots of diverse ethnic origin, but there were very, very few women, even in my class, which is actually quite large. And the few that I did know all seemed to have switched major from computer science to something else before we graduated.
Do you think the idea of meritocracy is problematic in Silicon Valley? Because, you know, one of the things that people who worked at PayPal told me was this belief that it was a meritocracy and they were hiring based on merit, when in fact you were hiring a lot of people that you knew.
So I think meritocracy in a vacuum is not a bad idea. I think being able to honestly say the people that are here have earned their spot is very powerful. It's a great motivator to say you are the best of the best. The downside of meritocracy, if that's the only criterion you choose, you select for people you know, because if you don't know how to reach out into other groups, other communities, other flavors of engineers, for lack of a better term, you're going to select from a fairly shallow pool. We ran out of candidates because I ran out of male friends at U of I, and there was really not anyone else to recruit.
One of the most interesting parts of your story to me is what happened at Slide, where you admit that there were some bros and there was a sort of bro-y culture that developed and you took action. What happened there?
the thing about Slide is actually, I think what triggered my attention to all these things was really Slide, where I started out with basically a neutral point of view. The culture will shape itself, we'll get some really bright people in, and while at PayPal I was too young and we were going too quickly, and I just didn't really have enough of a worldview to understand what was being shaped, at Slide I had seen enough of these companies, and I started to realize that what was forming itself without any guidance was actually not what I liked, not what I wanted to do. The sort of a hard drinking and some of the, on a bad day I might call it sexist behaviors was really not at all what I was comfortable with. And when I sort of tried to gently steer it, it wasn't going away on its own. And that, when I sort of realized, if I don't take matters very seriously and start pushing out and sort of drawing some very bright lines about what's okay, what's not okay, what's expected, it wouldn't cure itself.
Now at a firm, you've taken a different approach, and you are much more focused on hiring and promoting women. Mm-hmm. What are you doing differently at a firm that you didn't do at PayPal or Slide?
So the most important thing that we did at a firm is we took culture as a sort of first-class citizen. There was never a moment when we didn't ask ourselves, what is this decision, what is this process, what is this framing do to our culture, how do we think of our culture? A firm is the first company, this might sound embarrassing, but it's the first company where I wrote down our core values before we made our first hire. All the companies that I founded in the past, the culture merged, and sometimes it was better, sometimes it was not. With a firm, I came into the founding with a view that I have to form the culture, I have to control for what I want this company to be when it grows up. Even if we had no employees, I want to know that it's the kind of place that I'm proud of, as opposed to the one I'm trying to fix.
How do we get more people, and mostly men, to understand this problem and do something about it? What do you think needs to be done? What do CEOs and investors need to do?
So I think it's there's a bunch of things, and I don't know if I have an exhaustive list. I think just being aware of the fact that it's a talent war, and the way you win it isn't just by saying, well, I'm going to go back to the same old well and get the same people out. The way to win it, at least what's worked for us, is you widen the net you cast, and that naturally leads to embracing of diversity and inclusion, because you find diverse candidates in diverse places.
My conversation there with Max LEVCHIN, co-founder of PayPal, now CEO of a firm. Meantime, Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg has a new call to action in the wake of the Me Too movement, and it is all about getting more men to mentor women. Sandberg's Lean In initiative has just published a survey that shows a majority of men are now more uncomfortable working alone with women or mentoring them, something Sandberg calls unacceptable. We sat down for an exclusive interview with her to talk about her new Mentor Her movement, the backlash against Me Too, and more. Take a listen.
Now is a watershed moment. Me Too has shined a light on the need to end sexual harassment for good, forever, and that is critically important. It's also critically important, as you write in your book, that we get more women into leadership roles. Today we're publishing a survey done by Lean In and SurveyMonkey, which says that almost half of male managers in the U.S. are now afraid to do common work activities with women. And if the reaction to what's going on is that men stop mentoring women, that's unacceptable, because we need more women in leadership roles, and women have long gotten less mentorship and sponsorship than men, particularly women of color. So now's the time to invest more in women, not less. And so Mentor Her, which we're launching today, calls on all leaders to mentor women, but also to make access equal. Our survey also shows that a senior man today is 3.5 times more likely to hesitate to have dinner with a junior female colleague than a junior male colleague, and 5 times less likely to feel that they can travel with a junior female colleague than a male colleague. We have to make access equal. If you're not comfortable having dinner alone with a woman, then don't have dinner alone with a man. Have lunches and breakfasts with everyone. Or have dinner, but make sure everyone's behaving appropriately. What matters is that access for women is equal. Because again, now is our time to invest more, not less, in getting more women into leadership roles.
You've shared your own experiences with harassment, a hand on your leg, under the table, at a meeting, unwanted visits to your hotel room to the point where you had to call security. 25% of the people in your survey think the reports we've heard so far of sexual harassment are just the tip of the iceberg. Do you agree? And what do you think is the next chapter here?
I feel fortunate that everyone I've ever worked for has been not just appropriate, but supportive. And then my next sentence thought to myself is, that shouldn't be lucky, that should be a basic, because every woman and man deserves a safe and secure workplace. And that needs to change. But in order for it to change, we need institutional long-ranging change. So we need companies of all types, organizations of all types, to adopt clear policies. Policies that when reports are made, things are investigated, there is swift action taken. We need victims to feel safe. No retribution, the legal support they need, the social support they need. And we need to really end the culture of complicity, where people can look the other way and not feel responsible. We're all responsible for what goes on in the workforce. And importantly, we need more women in leadership. It's not a surprise to figure out that organizations that have more women in leadership roles have lower levels of sexual harassment and better work-life policies and perform at a higher rate, because more diverse teams perform better. And so in this watershed moment, we need to make sure that we really, really continue to invest and get more women in leadership roles.
Some people have complained that the Me Too movement has gone too far, that some of the stories that have been told shouldn't be told, and this is more like a public lynching. What do you think?
I think the question is not if Me Too has gone too far, but if Me Too has gone far enough. Because this can't just be a moment in time where people raise their voice. These brave women that have raised their voices, they want long-standing change that's not just for the day or the month, but for the years and the decades. And that means we have to have the right institutional policies. And those policies have to include due process investigations. Things need to be investigated and swift action needs to be taken. And importantly, we need to end the culture of complicity. We need to end the practice of looking the other way and then it's not your responsibility, because it's all of our responsibility.
Ev Williams, the co-founder of Twitter, told me in my book that he thinks if there were more women on the early Twitter team early on, maybe online harassment and trolling wouldn't be such a problem, that they weren't thinking about this enough. They were thinking about great things that could be done with their product, not how it might be used to send death threats. You know, my understanding is also that when you got to Facebook, you started asking questions about the content policies, and that may well be why Facebook does a much better job of this than Twitter. How do you think the internet might be different if women had been more involved in more equal numbers at building it early on? Like, do you think online harassment and trolling would be the problem it is today?
I think the data is super clear that more women in leadership roles in all industry has huge positive benefits. Higher performance for those companies, better work-life policies, lower levels of sexual harassment. And I do think that women play an important role in looking out for some of the gender-based harassment that women have long faced. I think Facebook is lucky because our leader, Mark Zuckerberg, takes these issues every bit as seriously as I have. But do I think Silicon Valley would be a better place if there were more women running more companies? Absolutely. I think every industry would be a better place if there were more women running more companies and more women in government. And when we fought to get here, but women are 20% of the U.S. Congress. And I think we often suffer from the tyranny of low expectations. I remember when women got 20% of the seats in the Senate in 2012, and all the articles were like, women take over the Senate. You're like, wait a second. 50% of the population with 20% of the seats is not a takeover. It's a gap. And I think we need to make sure that in this watershed moment, we make the long-standing change we need. No sexual harassment ever for anyone, and investing in women so that women get their share of the leadership roles. We are very far from that, but this is a moment where we can invest more to make it happen.
That was our exclusive interview with Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg. Still ahead, the bitter Uber-Waymo court battle played out this week with former Uber CEO Travis Kalanick taking the stand. His grilling ahead. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg. This week, SoftBank confirmed it will take its Japanese telecom operation public within a year to separate the company's activities broadly into investing in telecom arms. Speaking at a news conference, SoftBank President Masayoshi Son said this will help him spend more time on longer-term global corporate strategy and focus more on deal-making. Well, Travis Kalanick took the stand this week during the Uber-Waymo trade secrets trial, and on day 2 of the former Uber CEO's testimony, Waymo lawyers went after Kalanick, painting a picture of someone obsessed with winning the race for self-driving supremacy. But they didn't necessarily get very far. Joel Rosenblatt covers the courts for Bloomberg and was at the trial.
This is his second day, and Waymo's lawyers came at him kind of hard, not as hard as you might expect. And then, of course, on cross-examination, Uber's own lawyers were asking him questions which were clearly he was very well prepared for. Waymo, the big kind of news, the big surprise really to me was that Waymo didn't come at him very hard. There are a lot of details that Waymo has dug up over the course of this litigation that are very troublesome for Uber, and they really didn't ask Travis Kalanick about very many of those. And that was a bit of a surprise to me.
So does that make you think Waymo doesn't have as strong of a case as you might have thought?
Initially, I was kind of wondering that, but then as I puzzled through it, and then as I stayed in the courtroom after Travis Kalanick left, you saw what was going on. Travis Kalanick offered a lot of kind of I don't knows, I don't remember, about a lot of the kind of more difficult pieces that they asked about, that Waymo asked about, as you predicted, Emily. And I should have taken a better cue from you. And then after he left, and I think Waymo has just kind of figured out that that's what they're going to get from him. And then after he left, a forensic expert, a computer forensic expert that is kind of evaluated the case and evaluated the most damning evidence, came in and offered testimony about all kinds of kind of data and the technical issues, technical kind of problems that Uber has, and it got very damning. It got very problematic very quickly, and it was kind of just an interesting contrast to Travis Kalanick's testimony.
So what is next? Hopefully fewer I do not recalls.
Yeah, there will be fewer of those. It will be interesting. Larry Page is still up. I think that's kind of later, but it'll be interesting. He's a very quiet person. I've seen him testify before, and he's been a bit awkward. I think he's going to have to kind of show up and be a bit better in court than I've seen him as a result of Kalanick's good performance. I mean, it was a good performance for Uber. So now we're going to see some very difficult evidence, some technical evidence, and we're going to learn just how deep into the weeds this jury is willing to get. I think that's the real question. It's always kind of a dicey proposition to guess what juries are going to do or what they're thinking.
Right.
In my experience, juries have taken the effort to really dig into stuff, and if they do that, Waymo's still very much alive.
That was Bloomberg's Joel Rosenblatt. Still ahead, Tesla's bull-bear standoff is only growing after the company's latest earnings report. We will bring you both sides ahead. And a reminder, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are now live streaming on Twitter. You can check us out at Technology weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to the best of Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang. The Tesla bull-bear tussle isn't ending anytime soon, as the company's fourth quarter results had something for both camps. Bulls cheered the significantly lower than expected cash burn during the quarter, while bears noted the lack of an update on Model 3 production and flat Model 3 deposits. We dug into both sides with Nomura Instinet Managing Director and Senior Analyst Romit Shah, who currently has a buy rating on Tesla, as well as our Bloomberg editor-at-large, Corey Johnson.
I see a company that's been borrowing a lot of money, that's been taking a lot of customer deposits for cars that they can't build. We knew what the numbers were, but it's really striking that a company that was once growing cars produced at 60, 70% year-over-year clip is now at less than 1% growth in terms of the number of cars it can build. What we're hearing about the first Model 3s, at least some of their views, I posted one on my Twitter page at Corey TV that shows some real car guys looking at the car, looking at the engineering of the Model 3 and finding real issues where they can put their thumb right through the side entry to the trunk on one side and can barely see through it on the other side, and that it just looks really uneven, that there's attachments of pieces of felt and things where the door doesn't close quite right and glued onto the door coverings. So they're clearly struggling with the production of this Model 3. It's more than they can handle right now. What we see in the earnings release is lots more promises about production, as we always see from Tesla, and lots more borrowing and poor free cash flow numbers, which is what we also always see from Tesla.
Taking a look at Tesla after hours on the Bloomberg, shares not changed much right now.
Yeah.
Rohit, what do you think? Are the things that Corey is talking about here a concern?
If you look at the results, what you're seeing here is real progress. They built 220 Model 3 cars in the third quarter. They built over 1,500 Model 3 cars in the fourth quarter. And based on their production guidance for the first quarter, they're going to build probably north of 15,000 vehicles. So if they can continue on this trajectory, and I thought it was important that they reiterated their production guidance from the start of the year, then you got a company who's going to grow their revenues roughly 100%, we think, to about $25 billion. Very hard to find a multi-billion-dollar company growing at this rate.
Corey, let's take a look at GHTG BTV2341.
Right.
Production. Tesla cars produced each quarter over the last several quarters. We're seeing it holding steady. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells you just what we're saying, is that producing 1,500 cars in a quarter and a couple hundred the previous quarter isn't what investors thought they were getting involved in. I'd be surprised if Roma actually believes the production guidelines and really thinks that they're going to produce what they've said they're going to produce, since they keep missing their own estimates over and over again. I think the whole world really wants this company to be a great success, and we want great cars that don't burn a lot of fuel, that are great for the environment, look cool, and are safe and fun to drive. The problem is Tesla can't build them.
Romit, do you believe it?
No, I mean, I just look at the numbers. They increased their production of the Model 3 by a factor of 10 in the fourth quarter, and they're targeting to increase it by another factor of 10 in the first quarter. And, you know, cash flow.
But do you believe those numbers, Romit? Like, do you really? Are you going to stand here and say they're going to hit the numbers they're putting in the press release today?
Yeah, we have these production numbers in our model, and if you look at our price target of $500, it's predicated on them growing revenues 100% this year. So, we're in print with these forecasts.
What makes you so confident, when this is a company and a CEO that's admitted, facing production hell and has missed many targets?
It's true, but you have to think about it this way, that the world is moving towards electric vehicles, and Tesla is really the only game in town, and will be for the next 2 years. And so whether they get to 4,000 units by the end of Q2 or 5,000 units, I think really misses the point here. You've got a multi-billion-dollar company that's growing at a very significant rate. If you look at the reviews, the customer reviews of the Model 3, and we've driven one ourselves, they're phenomenal. I think for most people, it'll probably be the best car they'll ever drive. And you see that in the backlog. They've got a backlog of over 500,000 reservations that continue to grow. So it's a premium car in the right segment of the automotive market. And, all they need to do is get gain a couple percent market share in the automobile industry, and they're going to be doing they're going to be doing more than $100 billion in revenue, and I think this stock will be quite a bit higher.
Nomura Instinet Managing Director and Senior Analyst Romit Shah, and our Bloomberg Editor-at-Large, Corey Johnson there. Well, SpaceX has officially launched the world's most powerful rocket. The Falcon Heavy lifted off from Florida's Kennedy Space Center Tuesday to embark on its first test flight. It was carrying a red Tesla Roadster on an endless road trip past Mars. Following the launch, SpaceX did something never before seen in space history. It re-landed multiple rocket cores back on Earth. 2 of the 3 15-story boosters used in the launch came back and landed upright at Cape Canaveral. The boosters landed at the same time and side by side. This is a major milestone in the company's quest to grow its customer base and fund its vision of making life multiplanetary. Coming up, after facing threats and harassment online, Brianna Wu decided to take what she knows about the tech industry and run for Congress to fight for the rights of online users in Washington. We will speak with her next. Plus, former Google Vice President and White House CTO Megan Smith joins us to talk about the challenges surrounding diversity in the workplace and building a more inclusive culture. This is Bloomberg. Over the last year, big tech firms stand accused of transgressions such as selling campaign ads to shadowy Russian groups and not doing enough to fight harassment and threats on their own platforms. Brianna Wu, who worked in the video game industry and is now running for Congress in Massachusetts' 8th District, is here to explain how she wants to enact change in tech. She knows from personal experience how visceral the trolls can be. Brianna also plays a critical role in a chapter of my new book, Brotopia, Breaking Up the Boys Club of Silicon Valley.
Take us back to Gamergate because, you know, some people may not remember just how bad it was.
Right.
This, you know, was a few years ago, and, you know, suddenly you had what seemed to be the entire gaming industry attacking you.
It was really harsh. You know, the summer leading up to Gamergate, what happened is the forces that became the alt-right, they found a playbook to silence any woman in the game industry that they didn't like. They would go after her career, they would critique her, they would send her threats, they would, you know, basically try to get her fired from her job. And this was happening left and right to my friends. And then, you know, I realized that the men in our field were not going to speak out for the women that were being run out. I had many back channel conversations asking them to do the right thing, and they wouldn't. So what I learned during Gamergate is I kind of had to do the right thing myself. It led to, you know, there's no good way to have a Law and Order episode made about you, but you know, that's what happened with all the threats I got.
You were getting threats on Twitter and Facebook. I mean,
in real life, absolutely.
Right. Physical threats.
Physical threats. I had people, you know, throw a brick through the window of my home. Just a few days ago, I had somebody outside my home, my new home, taking pictures and sending me.
So you're still getting harassed as a result of Gamergate breaking out 4 years ago?
Yes, absolutely. It's just, we had a thing with Nolan Bushnell losing an award this week for his sexist past. This is the man that founded Atari, and I had spoken out about that. And, you know, the death threats and rape threats are back again. It's exhausting to deal with.
I do know that Nolan Bushnell issued an apology.
He did?
You know, one of the things that I talk about in the book is, you know, what if women had been more involved in creating these products like Twitter and Facebook from the very beginning? And Ev Williams, the co-founder of Twitter, told me that he thinks online harassment and trolling might not be such a problem. In fact, wouldn't be such a problem today if there had been more women on the early team. He said, we just weren't thinking about it. You know, they were thinking about wonderful and amazing things that could be done with Twitter, not how easily it could be used to hurl death threats.
Absolutely.
Do you think that having more women in the design of, let's say, Twitter or Facebook or Reddit, that online harassment would not exist today?
I wouldn't say it wouldn't exist, because it would exist in different forms. But, you know, if you don't have people at the table that have different problems, like putting their input into a product, it's going to be a worse product. Like, the tech industry creates products that work for a very small segment of the population. It doesn't work very well for me, and I would guess very well for you. So I think, you know, it's not just the harassment. There's a larger business case to be made here. You know, in my industry, video games, women make up more than half of the audience of gamers these days. We're a sliver of the people actually running game studios. And there's so much money that we're leaving on the table.
So what do you think of the changes that Twitter and Facebook have made more recently?
I would say, for me personally, I think Twitter has done a lot of work that doesn't get credited. I personally, I see the filters they put in place to, like, stop me from seeing the death threats. So I do appreciate that. I think they've taken steps, but, you know, there's still a long way to go.
I know that's part of your platform, is helping to protect users. Are there laws currently that if you get attacked online, there's actual recourse? Like, is it illegal to do that?
So I've spoken with Danielle Citron. She's the world's most preeminent legal expert on this subject, and it is. But it's worth noting the tools we have for this are laws that were written in the 90s. And the world has changed a lot since the 1990s. So we need a Congress that can come in and write those laws, and more importantly, fund divisions of the FBI that can actually go look at these crimes and prosecute them. Due to freedom of information requests, we had people that sent me the most explicit, horrific death threats you can imagine, confessed to the FBI, but they chose not to bring that to trial and prosecute those people. So we need to, I believe, fund a certain division of the FBI that's going to look into those kind of extreme cases online and, make them meet the justice system.
How different do you think the gaming industry would be if women had been more involved in creating the games from the start?
It would be, we'd have better games. We'd have much better games. Do you know how bored I am with first-person shooters where you go kill 1 million people and then get an ending screen? No, we would have much better games. We'd have better stories. We'd have better characters. We'd be making more money. The game industry is sick, and we are not in a really great place right now. So,
how much progress has been made since Gamergate?
None. I really wish I could sit here and tell you we had. And when I stood up to Gamergate, I did it because I believed the men in our field would do the right thing and change. But we just haven't seen it. With the Me Too movement right now, the only consequences we've seen for that in my field is one editor-in-chief fired about it and one freelancer fired, and Nolan Bushnell not getting an award. That's not really groundbreaking progress.
So why should we vote for you?
I think that we need a generation of legislators that are informed on technology. This is not a bipartisan, this is a bipartisan issue. Cybersecurity is a huge threat to this country right now. Do you remember the Mirai botnet that took down most of the information infrastructure a couple of years ago? That was 2 teenagers essentially doing that. We've got to really double down and bet big on cybersecurity. So I think there's a litany of perspectives that are just not being heard by our current Congress, and we need new leaders.
Thanks to Brianna Wu there, congressional candidate in Massachusetts. Well, this week we also heard from someone who has championed improving gender diversity in the workforce as the 3rd Chief Technology Officer of the United States under President Obama and Vice President at Google before that. Megan Smith, CEO of Shift7, joined us from Washington.
There's people from all backgrounds across this country who would love to be part of the tech sector. When we're coming into town, Cheyenne, Denver, Atlanta, we just get the word out, and then we're running kind of an evening career fair, and the tech companies are showing up. People are showing up for the speed mentoring we're doing. So a lot of people want in on these better, higher paying jobs. They pay 50% more than the average American salary. There's hundreds of thousands of jobs open in America in every sector. Really, all companies are software tech companies at this point.
And yet, gender representation in computing, women make up 25% of computing jobs. The statistics for blacks and Latinos are downright depressing, and women-led companies are getting just 2% of funding. Why do you think that is still?
Just extraordinary sexism and racism, ageism, all of this. And we really have to evolve out of this culture. And your book is wonderful, Emily. And I'm about halfway through, and it's I know so many people in there, and it's just full of, we got ourselves into this, let's pattern map the person, or this kind of profile that the VCs were funding. It's really a huge challenge. As you said, over 90% of money from the venture world is going to men. 75%, on the Tech Jobs Tour and on Rise of the Rest from Steve Case, it's really going to Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston. So lots of the country. I remember being with Steve. We were in Columbus, Ohio, and he was saying, Ohio is getting in 1 year what Silicon Valley is getting in a week. So this is diversity of location, of people. We have so much talent in America. We've got to field the whole team. I'm encouraged from the tour because I saw so many extraordinary entrepreneurs from, all backgrounds that we really need to get behind, and they'll lift this country.
I'm not sure if you've gotten through the Google chapter yet, but, I write in the book that Google's founders, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, really focused on hiring strong women in the early days, and they got some incredible women like Sheryl Sandberg and Susan Wojcicki and yourself. And if you look at the numbers today, Google's numbers are simply average, and they're facing this big lawsuit from the Department of Labor about pay disparities between men and women. What do you think went wrong there, or what is the lesson in that?
It's in all of the companies. We just have extraordinary bias built in. And so, as we're asking questions, the interview bias, leadership really has to just make this a very top priority. The leaders of all the tech companies, like all companies, care about diversity. But it needs to move from number 20 to number 1 to 3. Diverse teams just make better products. So it's a shareholder value opportunity and import for everybody. So we really need to do this work. There's lots of stuff that most companies aren't doing. We wrote a piece in the White House called Raise the Floor, and we just listed all the things that leaders, you can do in your culture. There's so many practices that would make a huge difference if people would pick them up, and most people don't know them. So we really have a reckoning. This is a form of time's up. It's been plenty of time. Let's go. We have tons of history that brought us to this place, but none of us created this problem. But once we know about it, let's go.
Megan, discrimination is one thing, sexual harassment is another. What do you think about the criticism of the Me Too movement that it's crossed a line?
Sexual harassment is rampant, and it's very clear from all the brave people who are speaking up. I think many men are in shock, learning how rampant it is, and we really need women and men to come together and really push forward. My sister-in-law, when she was a young engineer in the 70s, used to have a Hustler centerfold above her lab bench as she was doing chip design, because that was normal. And you open your book with the photograph that was this was the photograph that people were using to bench test all the different screens, and it was a picture of a woman, but actually it was a picture of a completely naked woman from Playboy. When I was at Google, a story that you don't know is I found out about this, and I asked Alan Eustace, who was head of engineering, if we could stop using it, and he said, of course. And we immediately stopped. And so men and women can work together. None of us created that problem, but it's long-standing. You also write about Ada Lovelace. Ada Lovelace wasn't even allowed to write a proper paper, the founder of algorithms in the 1800s. And so she took a piece that she was translating, a 20-page piece that she translated, and she added 55-page thesis of what modern computing, what would be this idea of algorithms, wrote the first algorithm. She's the founder of what has become, computer programming and coding. And we need to know about her. And I had never even heard of her until I was at 10 Downing Street one time and saw her portrait.
I'm so glad to hear that story about Lena and how receptive management was to it at Google. You mentioned some prescriptive things that companies can do, and I'm curious, in your work at Shift 7, what are the top 3 things that people who want to make this a priority can do, whether their companies are big or small?
Yeah, I think what's exciting is there are very good things to do. For example, leaders just talking about it. One of the greatest moves was Lou Gerstner at IBM just prioritized this as part of the transition in the 90s. And he took those employee resource groups that everybody has, most companies have them, the LGBT group, the women's group, the veterans group, African Americans, Hispanics, all these different groups of talented employees. And he connected his executive team, which was not as diverse, to those employees and created not only just, talking to them once in a while, but really knowing. And he added it to the agenda of the weekly executive meeting. So suddenly this voice of many more employees was coming up. And then he asked those people very specifically, how do I get more employees, more customers, and more suppliers from your community? And how do I help you thrive at IBM? And it really made a huge difference. So it's really, I would say the move there is a structured, broad conversation, and then look for what's working and then share that and make that broader.
Thanks, Megan Smith, CEO of Shift 7. Coming up, Samsung's J.Y. Lee walks free after a year in prison for bribery. We head to Seoul for the latest next. This is Bloomberg. Some context on last week's shakeup at Airbnb. At the company's annual planning meeting in San Francisco, co-founder and CEO Brian Chesky privately told his then CFO Lawrence Tosi that Airbnb was putting off its initial public offering. Tosi had reportedly been lining up investors and was eyeing a jump to chief operating officer. Tosi protested the IPO delay and the decision to promote Belinda Johnson to COO above him. And by the end of the meeting with Chesky, Tosi was out of a job. Well, Delivery Hero is turning a corner after the food delivery startup reported 2017 sales exceeded the company's guidance. Revenue climbed 60%, causing the stock to jump as much as 6.5% in Frankfurt. Bloomberg News spoke to the company's CEO earlier and asked if Delivery Hero has a sufficient scale globally.
Yeah, absolutely. We are the leading platform in 35 markets globally, and we have scale. Of course, we're still growing very, very fast, and we'll continue to do so.
In South Korea, Samsung Electronics heir J.Y. Lee is free to leave prison almost a year after he was detained in a bribery scandal. A high court suspended Lee's sentence and put him on probation for 4 years. He was the highest profile business figure caught in a corruption probe that brought down former South Korean President Park Geun-hye. We went live to Seoul and spoke with Bloomberg's Stephen Engel.
This is like ripping off a Band-Aid before the wound is fully healed for many South Koreans. They thought 6 months ago this cozy relationship between a businessman and politicians was finally, they turned a new page on that. They thought that when that district court in August handed down the 5-year prison sentence for various charges, including corruption and influence peddling with the now deposed president. But now after this high court, the appellate court ruled yesterday that we're going to lower the sentence down to 2.5 years. He can walk free, and sure enough, he walked free from that Seoul detention center yesterday and gave a little sentence or a statement. He read from a paper basically saying he apologized for not showing his best side. The past year was a valuable time for looking inwards to himself. But at the same time, you know, he's going perhaps back to the company, and it could be business as usual again for the chaebol here in South Korea.
So you do expect him to go back to the company and go back into an operating role? Because we've talked about the fact that Samsung hasn't seemed to have been affected. You know, when you look at the earnings, when you look at the products they're turning out, hasn't been affected. The business hasn't been affected by the scandal. Yeah. And he's going to just slot right back in?
We don't know if he's going to go back in to the same kind of role he had. Keep in mind, they put new division heads, including a new CEO, the former semiconductor chief at Samsung. They put new leadership at the end of the third quarter. And you're right, the company has been doing great. They had record full-year earnings. The fourth quarter was gangbusters. It didn't meet expectations from analysts, but still a very good number in chips and in mobile phones and screens. We don't know if he's going back to the company, but keep in mind, as you rightfully said, Emily, at the top, other past chairmen or heads of companies, including Lee's father, Lee Kun-hee, they have been convicted of various crimes. They were all given suspended sentences and went right back to their company. I think there'll be a cooling off period, see how the public reacts to this. And then going forward, the people that we're speaking to say this could be bad for activist investors who perhaps want change within the company. They could go on a big, massive acquisition spree. They could do what they want at the expense of the minority shareholders. That's what some of the worst case scenario, according to some of the analysts we've spoken to, could pan out to be.
Bloomberg's Stephen Engel from Seoul. And that does it for this edition of the Best of Bloomberg Technology. We'll bring you all the latest in tech throughout the week. Next week, we have Dick Costolo, the former CEO of Twitter, joining us Monday. Tune in every day, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. And remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology are live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Technology Weekdays. That is all for now. This is Bloomberg.